10 million years ago, the Earth was a place of wild chaos and untamed beauty. A world ruled by colossal beasts and shaped by a climate far harsher than anything humans would know today. In this ancient age, what would one day become humanity was nothing more than an early chapter in the long book of evolution. Small bands of ape-like beings, neither entirely ape nor fully human, learning to survive in a land where life and death often depended on the smallest decisions. They were not yet Homo sapiens, nor even Homo erectus. They were distant ancestors. Creatures with strong, muscular limbs covered in coarse, dark hair, long arms that could swing from branch to branch, and eyes that carried the faint spark of curiosity that would one day ignite into intelligence. Their faces were a mixture of protruding brows and flat noses, with powerful jaws built for chewing fibrous plants and cracking nuts. Towering forests stretched endlessly, their canopies thick enough to blot out the sun in places. The air was heavy with humidity, the ground littered with fallen leaves, rotting fruit, and the prints of predators far larger than anything alive today. Herds of massive prehistoric elephants, gomphotheres, wandered the plains while saber-toothed cats stalked the undergrowth. Gigantic birds with beaks like axes hunted smaller creatures, their shadows sweeping across the forest floor. Rivers teemed with crocodiles longer than a man was tall, and the skies were alive with the cries of creatures that would vanish from the earth millions of years later. In this unforgiving landscape, survival meant adapting quickly. These early proto-humans lived in small groups of a dozen or so, bound by the need to protect each other from predators and the harsh elements. They communicated not with words, but with a blend of guttural sounds, hand gestures, and expressions that carried meaning through instinct rather than language. They foraged for food each day, eating fruits, leaves, roots, and the occasional insects they could catch. Meat was rare, taken only if a scavenged carcass was found before the vultures and hyenas stripped it clean. Every day was a test of skill and instinct. At sunrise, the group would move carefully through the forest in search of food, the older males watching for danger while the females carried the young. Climbing was still their greatest defense. When danger appeared, they could vanish into the trees in seconds, clinging to high branches where even large predators could not follow. But life was changing. Climate shifts were slowly breaking the forests apart, opening stretches of dry grassland where trees were sparse. Here, climbing was no longer enough. On the open plains, these beings had to rely on speed, awareness, and teamwork to avoid becoming prey. It was in these moments, crossing dangerous ground between safe patches of forest, that their growing intelligence began to show. They learned to move silently, to keep to the shadows, and to post a watcher who scanned the horizon for predators. Over time, their eyes adapted to spotting movement at great distances. Their hearing sharpened to detect the faintest rustle in the grass. Some began using sticks, not just for balance, but for defense, waving them to scare smaller predators or striking at snakes hidden under leaves. Fire was still millions of years away, but the seeds of curiosity were already there. When lightning struck a dry tree during a storm, the strange flickering light fascinated them. They would gather near the smoldering remains, sniffing the charred wood, picking at roasted insects, and remembering without understanding that this thing brought warmth, light, and the smell of cooked food. One day, in some distant future, their descendants would learn to make it. At night, danger grew worse. The forest came alive with the roars of predators, and the group huddled together in high branches, pressed close for warmth. They would listen to the distant screams of prey animals, the crashing of undergrowth, and the deep growls of hunters moving in the dark. Fear was constant, but it also bound them together. Those who strayed too far often never returned. The seasons shaped their lives. During the wet months, food was plentiful. Fruits heavy on the branches, streams flowing with fish, insects buzzing in swarms. But in the dry season, the forest thinned, and the group was forced to travel farther each day to find enough to eat. It was during these hungry months that their cooperation became most important. They began sharing food more often, keeping the weakest members alive so the group could remain whole. And then, somewhere in this long span of time, something remarkable began to happen. In some groups, the young learned faster, imitating the movements of their elders and even improving them. A stone was not just a thing to throw. It could be used to crack open nuts, or to smash the hard shell of a giant beetle larva. The cleverest individuals remembered where certain plants grew and led the group back to them at the right time of year. Memory was becoming more than instinct. Generation after generation, these changes added up. They were still far from human, but the first tiny steps had been taken. Curiosity, cooperation, and problem-solving were slowly shaping them into something new. 10 million years in the past, under the watchful eyes of predators and in the shadow of towering forests, the ancestors of humanity were learning the skills that would one day let their descendants conquer the world. Theirs was not a life of comfort or peace. It was a constant battle against starvation, injury, and the ever-present threat of death. But each challenge, each narrow escape, each clever trick learned from another member of the group pushed them further along the path. They did not know it, but they were writing the first chapter in the story of humankind, a story that would stretch across millions of years from the treetops of ancient Africa to the cities of the modern world. Even in that distant time, the spark of what made us human was there, flickering faintly in the eyes of these ape-like beings as they gazed out over the vast, dangerous land, sensing, though they could not understand, that they were meant for something more.